Our first writer says, I think I have more of a need for order than I had previously realized. I'm really detail-oriented, and I like some things to be a certain way. That's almost always a response to feeling out of control. When people feel out of control, then they compensate for that. They try to get a sense of control by having everything just so. That doesn't have to be a problem. Such people can be meticulous, certified public accountants, for example. It matters when you start to affect other people. But it usually begins in childhood. Just saying. We haven't even gotten to what you're going to talk about. You say, my mom is extremely OCD about most details and wants everything a certain way. And that just nearly killed me as a kid. It was constantly annoying and constantly controlling. Now, that's what I'm talking about. If your need for order starts to affect other people and you have to have them a certain way, yeah, that's gone past orderly. That's controlling. You continue. So I've dreaded being like that my whole life. Her OCD has always driven me crazy, and I wanted to be the opposite of her. Well, I'm not the opposite of her at all. Little surprise. We are injured emotionally by the fear and the pain of our parents. And then it's not uniform, but it's more likely that we will also mimic whatever behaviors they used to deal with their pain. That's not uniformly true. So, for example, some people who are raised by angry parents will become angry because they saw it modeled, they saw it work. Some people who are raised by angry people become extremely withdrawn. But at least we can see where this came from in your case. It's not inherited. It's not a gene. She just gave you her fear. And either then you learned to control things to give you a feeling of safety, safety from the fear, or you simply mimicked her. Doesn't really matter which, and overanalyzing this isn't going to help you all that much. We're going to talk about what you can do. You say, for example, when I see misspellings, they drive me crazy. I am so distracted by words being spelled wrong or sentences that don't make sense to me that I can't even focus on the substance of the sentence. There's an example of where your fear of being out of control is affecting you in a negative way. If you can't read something because it's misspelled, honey, I get hundreds, often hundreds of emails a day. If I were bothered by misspellings, I'd get through 3 emails because on the whole, people spell horribly, and their grammar's even worse. And you do it because it creates the illusion of safety. You can control spelling. You can control words. You can control the placement of things in your cupboards. But it doesn't create happiness. You continue. Another thing I do is point out people's mistakes by correcting or modifying them. People never feel loved when I do that. No kidding. And now we're into the area that we're talking about, where having things orderly can actually be an asset. If I've got somebody who is operating on my eye, for example, I would really like to have somebody who's meticulous. Or building a bridge, I would really appreciate just a little bit of OCD. So when we're organizing things, it can be productive, although even that can be overdone to the point where we become perfectionistic and we're frozen. Doing a job, rechecking the job, refining the job, re-refining the job till we're dead and we get one thing done in a week when we have been assigned 55. But it's always a problem when we control people. So when you're truly safe, which comes from feeling truly loved, it's the only thing that creates real safety. You won't need the artificial safety of controlling other people. You continue. I did this to you one day when you, meaning me, when you were telling a story about somebody else and I corrected you about some wrong detail that you said in your story. It was compulsive. I couldn't stop myself, even though I knew it was your story and it was none of my business. It didn't bother me, frankly. I don't remember it. But it does bother a whole lot of other people. And even if it didn't, the fact that you feel compelled to do it interferes with your sense of peace. You'll sometimes be with loving people who don't care about your OCD and your compulsivity at all, but it will still bother you. Just something to understand. Love creates safety. Organizing and controlling things never does. Maybe during a hurricane, having things ordered and controlled does. But see, again, that's things, not people. You conclude, what can I do when I feel that compulsive need to correct things? I know that I can be quiet, but is there anything else that might make it easier for me when being quiet is hard? Oh, yes. You immediately ask yourself this question. People think sometimes, and maybe sometimes I do oversimplify things, but there are some things that really are as simple as I say. I decide to be loving, to be unkind or kind. I decide to be loving or critical. I decide to go left or right. You immediately ask yourself this question: what do I really want? What do I want here? What kind of life? Do I want to feel important here by correcting somebody else? Do I need things to be in the right order so that I'll feel safe? Or do I really want to be happy? In which case, I just wouldn't really care one whit about an object being out of order, about somebody telling a wrong detail to a story, which, by the way, nobody on earth cares about. And yet, listen to somebody tell a story in a group where especially their spouse is present. When we went out to dinner Tuesday night, it was Wednesday. There are no conditions, none, where anybody in the group cares whether the two of you went out to dinner on Tuesday or Wednesday. Nobody cares. And yet we fuss about these little things. So the simple question is, do I want to be in control or do I want to be happy? I'm not saying this is going to be easy for you, but the question is that simple. New subject. My husband, Don, sometimes asks me a question from another room. When I answer, he says, "I can't hear you." I can just see this developing. So I come closer. He can't hear me. Then I come into the room and he still can't hear me. Now, since I know your husband, I happen to know he's not hearing impaired. So everybody who's listening can rule out needs a hearing aid. No, he doesn't. He simply likes things to be made as easy for him as possible. So he's playing you, really, like an instrument. He screams a question he wants an answer to into the next room. And then he just keeps saying, "I can't hear you. I can't hear you," till you're sitting right in front of him and writing the answer out so that he doesn't even have to hear it or remember it. See that? He's playing you. You continue. I speak louder. But then I'm not in the right position. I'm not looking at him right. My facial expression is off. Then I'm talking too loud. Then he doesn't understand what I'm saying. So I rephrase it again. I ask a question of him. I need to repeat it. See what I'm saying? He's playing you. He's playing you to come in and make things easy for him. And he's playing you in that he uses these opportunities to ask you a question to feel superior to you, to criticize you, to belittle you, to make you feel small. Now, this is all fairly ugly, but I also know Don well enough to know that he knows this is true. So talk to him now. When a question is not being asked, when he's not screaming at you from the next room, go find him. Maybe when this video chat's over, or put it on pause and go talk to him. When things are calm, and you tell him that if he is asking the question, he's the one that wants something, then it's his job to come where you are. See, this just isn't complicated. He is toying with you. This stops the game. It's his question. So when he yells the question, you yell back, because there's no reason you should have to go to the room where he is. You say, I'm in here. Nobody in our family yells conversations at somebody else. Nobody does that. If I have a question of Donna, I find her. If she's looking for me, she comes out and hollers my name until I respond. The other day, I was apparently doing something noisy near a machine, and she searched the whole yard for me. But she wanted to know where I was, so she took upon it herself the responsibility of finding me. You can use the cell phone, whatever. If I have a question, my responsibility to find you. He has a history of making you do the emotional work and the physical work, and then he just blames you. And this is yet another example. By the way, for those who are listening, I know the writer, I know her husband, and he knows he does this. So I'm just suggesting that you remind him, and the more you do, the more likely it is that he'll remember it the next time he goes to play you like this. New subject. This is somebody, a woman who's of roughly middle age, and I say that only because she mentions her mother, which automatically puts her mother into an older age bracket. She says, my mom recently read Real Love and Parenting at her request. She asked me to give it to her. She read it and gave it to some new parents that she knew, parents of, very young children. When I asked how she had liked it, she said she liked it a lot because it showed her all the things that she's done right. And since I know you and since I know her, she couldn't possibly have read the book. She must have been reading something else, Time magazine, and then made it up. Parents really don't like being told that they did a bad job. There are people who will admit that they did a row of figures, that they added them up incorrectly. There are people who admit that they painted their house the wrong color. They'll admit that they made mistakes as spouses, but oh boy, they will defend to the bloody death that they were great parents. They will. You want to know why? Because we really hated being hurt as children. We just hated it. And we swore that when we became parents, we wouldn't do those things. But then we did. And so we don't like that pointed out. Parents remember whatever they like of what they did. They remember the sweet moments. They remember the roof that they provided over your head. They remember the gifts that were given. They remember the vacations that you went on. They don't remember the controlling, the criticizing, the tone of voice, the scowl, all those things. It's just the nature of things. So asking your mother how she liked the book, that was actually pretty brilliant. That's pretty neutral. Being upset, and you didn't say that you were, but being upset that she didn't learn anything from it, yeah, that would be a waste of time. Pointing out to her that there are some things she needed to learn from it, that would go all the way into stupid. New subject. Here's somebody who says, I have a couple of friends who have an opinion about almost everything I say. I'm a little surprised you have them as friends then. Money, religion, politics, family, they always have something to say, and I hate it. So how could I see this differently? Not all that complicated. People are busy just being themselves. I'm going to repeat that because it's the answer to a whole lot of questions. of how could we see this differently? When we think people are doing things to us, criticizing us, wasting our time, cutting us off in traffic. People are busy being themselves and tending to their own needs. On the whole, it ain't about you. You just ain't that important. I was on a black radio show once in Harlem, and they were talking about racism. And I said, I live in the deep South. And on the whole, I pretty much don't see racism. I said, in fact, you flatter yourselves, because I was talking to a black host and there were black cars, that white people think about you at all. We hate everybody. We hate white people who aren't like us. We hate white people who are the wrong political party. We hate black people, brown people, people who speak a language different from ours, people who get in our way, people who cut us off in traffic, people who just, pretty much aren't exactly like us. We're that busy being ourselves and tending to our own needs. So it's not about you. Most people say controlling things all day. Examples. Here are just a few you'll be able to come up with. If you pay attention, all of just today of the controlling things that you hear and you write them down, I'd kind of actually be grateful if you sent me your list, because I may just compile a list of them. We say little controlling things constantly, like, you'll like somebody, for example, is talking about politics or whatever it is, and they say, you'll get it, meaning you'll come around to my point of view. People say, did you see that movie? I hear this one all the time. You didn't? Well, you really have to. You have to go see that movie. We've all heard that one, I don't know, 100 times. Now, I don't say it out loud, but inwardly I'm thinking, well, actually, no, it turns out I don't have to. I may or I may not, but I don't have to. Have you read that book? Oh, you have to. In fact, some people are so insistent about the have to that they get a copy of the book and send it to me. And then a week later, write me and say, well, what did you think of the book? So it's not just you have to, but you really do have to, and I'm going to make you, and I'm going to follow up and make sure that you did. As we're driving, people will say, turn left here. It'll be faster than the way that you normally go. Controlling all day long. As you're about to park somewhere in a parking lot, the passenger will say, well, park over there. Or people will say, think about it some more. You'll see that I'm right. You know that what you're eating isn't healthy for you, right? You know it's bad for you to smoke. You know it's not good for you to. You start compiling them. Just look around for one day. You don't want to do it for more than one day because, frankly, it will become quite irritating to you. Of all the little things that people say that tell you you should do something. It's amazing. Now, why do they do it? Rarely do people act with a single motivation. And it's the same here with you and your friends. When people tell you what you should do, there are many possible motivations all mixed up together. And because they're all mixed up together, it can be quite a mess. It makes them feel useful to offer advice. Without offering advice, I know people who feel relatively worthless. It's a terrible feeling. They've actually admitted to me that unless they can offer some brilliant observation during a conversation, they feel useless. It makes them feel powerful. Giving advice or telling people what they will or should do makes them feel smarter or better than the people they're advising. It's a pretty great feeling, actually, when without giving advice or making suggestions, you otherwise feel worthless. Fear is another reason people control. And this is kind of a combination of both the reasons I just talked about. Most people feel afraid because they feel inferior, useless, socially awkward. And making suggestions gives them a sense of less helplessness, less fear. Often we control just out of reflex, pure habit. Most of us have been bossed around all of our lives. As children, we were told, get down from there, don't do that, stop running, go wash your hands, eat this, don't eat that, sit this way, don't get that expression off your face or get another one on your face. And it just went on and on. Children are, this is a separate project if you'd like to do it. Watch for controlling things for one day, and then for the next day, watch for the number of times that parents tell their children what they should do in circumstances that it just frankly doesn't matter. So here's the 4-year-old little boy, and he's up on a table. He's not hurting anything. He's in his stocking feet. It's not a polished museum piece. It's 2 feet high, and he's up on the table. Where else would a 3-year-old boy go but up on a table? If there were a 8-foot table, he'd be up on that. Look at the number of times that parents tell their children what to do when they don't really need to. Another reason we control. We've been told what to do or what we should do so many times that it's become natural to us. It's the air we breathe. So we learn to do it with other people. Uncounted times I've watched young children tell other children what they should do or how to do it, because that's what they hear all day themselves. Now, here's the last reason for controlling. It's the only good one and is rare. In fact, it's so rare, I mention it almost in passing. When it does occur, it's mixed with the other motivations, which are just not loving. It's mixed with them to such an extent that it hardly counts. It's like drinking gasoline and saying, well, but I, flavored it with Kool-Aid. Sometimes people control because they really want to help or they offer advice. They have done or thought something that gave them pleasure or that was useful, and they're certain that it will have a beneficial effect on you too. They care about you, at least a little. So they can't help but share their wisdom with you. If I watch somebody out in the backyard and they're about to run through an area where I know that there are some holes created by rotten tree stumps, I will actually suggest that they run slower and look ahead of them so that they don't, fall in the hole and break their leg. So in that case, giving advice would be helpful. Yeah, but most advice doesn't come into that category. So why does it help to know all this? Because even though people often appear to be intrusive toward you, they're really just engaging in a very old habit or satisfying needs that they had long before they met you. And they do it with most people. Again, it's not about you. You continue. I don't know what to do with myself when these moments happen. When I found myself doing the rest of the short night, what I found myself doing the rest of the short night with these people was just keeping my distance from these two friends. Kind of silly. You were protecting yourself from no real threat. And that only serves to keep you afraid and alone. So if somebody tells you that you should do something, for example, or they offer an opinion, remember that they're being them. And I get these kind of comments just as much as you do. I just don't care because I realize what they're doing. And if they have something useful to say, like they recommend a book that I would like to read, I will. And if they recommend one I'm pretty sure I don't want to read, then I don't. You don't have to do anything. You're not being required to change. So what do you say? In most cases, nothing. People make a recommendation and you just say nothing at all. Or you might say, I might, or I'll think about it, or I hadn't thought about that. You don't have to say, even a monkey wouldn't have that opinion. You don't have to say that part. I haven't thought about it. You conclude actually and say, this same situation can happen for me with almost anybody. Of course, because you're really sensitive to being controlled and don't realize that other people are just being themselves. But if you do understand and know how to respond, you won't feel uncomfortable. I know just as many controlling people as you do, and I just am not uncomfortable. You're afraid. Fear makes you unhappy and miserable in relationships. So do whatever it takes, including some of the things that I've mentioned here, if you feel like it. I'm not telling you what to do either. But you'll sure be happier if you do whatever it takes to quit being afraid of being controlled, of being criticized, of being whatever. New subject. A woman described to me how she was loving to people in the first half of the day. And then she said things got busy and difficult, and she got stressed. And then she wasn't so nice to people. She said, so looking back on the day, in view of how quickly I became unloving, does that mean that I wasn't really loving for the first half of the day? It's a good question. No, it doesn't. You just felt loved incompletely. And who doesn't? So your love might have been limited, or it might have been even mixed with other motivations. But no, I believe you really were loving for the first half of the day. And it turns out that you can almost quantify love. So you had an ability to love on a scale of 0 to 10 of 5. And then along came circumstances that would require somebody to be loving at a 6.5. And you went, wow, I can't handle this. And you weren't loving anymore. Oh, big deal. It's information. It kind of tells you what it is, how capable you are, what your capacity is. It might influence what you take on for the rest of the day. So don't be judgmental. If a weightlifter goes into the gym and he normally can lift 150 pounds and he discovers, wow, I can only lift 120 pounds today. Does that mean he suddenly became weaker? Does that mean he never could lift 150 pounds? Does that mean he doesn't have the capacity to? No, that might very well be, because I've done this in a gym when I'm lifting or working. It just may simply be information like, I have a cold, I don't feel entirely myself, and I didn't realize it until I was stressed by lifting 150 pounds. See? So, just information, not a judgment. Lighten up a little bit. New subject. A woman writes, my daughter, Lily, is 13. For the last 2 years, she's had a cheap phone for emergencies and practicalities. To call us when she needs us, and so that we know where she is and that kind of thing. Recently, she has been insisting on being allowed to have a much more expensive smartphone. Her 2 siblings both received their first smartphone at 15. Now remember, Lily is 13. I feel strongly that Lily should wait until she's 15 too, for several reasons. And let me list them. First, to be fair to her siblings. Nah, who cares? Really? My older children only did this a handful of times each ever, but they would say, well, but you didn't do that with us. And I'd say, yeah, I was dumber then. I mean, what response is there to, I was dumber then? They don't have a response. They don't like it. But you learn as you go. All that matters is what each individual child needs. All of my children, for example, had the time. At some point in their lives, I told them that they had no more curfew. They could come in and they could go to sleep and they could do whatever they wanted to, as long as their schoolwork and their work here at home was done. And the age where that happened varied with every single child. It varied according to the capacity of the kid. Like, duh, you don't give everybody the same amount of weight to lift in the gym. Why? Because not everybody has the same strength. Your children all have different capacities. All you care about now is Lily. Doesn't matter what you did with the other kids. Reason number 2, you say, for reason to delay giving her a smartphone, is to delay the likely 24/7 addiction to a phone and to apps like disconnecting from other people. We've talked already about the ignoring attitude that her friends have because they're always on their phones and they don't talk to each other when they're sitting right next to each other. Although I will apply restrictions and monitoring. Yeah, you won't be applying restrictions and monitoring while she's with her friends. The list of reasons to delay a child getting a smartphone goes on and on. I have a 16-year-old grandson who doesn't have a smartphone. 16 years old. Now, he's probably the only 16-year-old in the state of Virginia who doesn't have one. But they've been demonstrated, proven studies to have an overall horribly negative effect on kids. Well, let's start with this question. Show me the overall benefit of children having a smartphone. There's no particular Snapchat that they have to see in that second. There's no reason they have to check Facebook right then. There's no particular movie that they absolutely have to Google in that second. Connection to electronics, I am not condemning. There are good reasons to be connected to electronics. In fact, you're experiencing one of them right now. I couldn't connect with you right this second if it weren't for the advantages of electronics. I'm using a microphone. I'm using a camera. I'm using a projector, a computer, and a screen that would have been utterly unthinkable 30 years ago. Not even in the realm of possibility. In fact, only less than 20 years ago, we accomplished the same kind of thing, recording my answers to questions with equipment that cost 10 times this much and wasn't this clear and wasn't this easy. Astonishing. So there's real advantages to electronics, but the use of electronics, just like every other good thing in life, can also be negative. They can be misused. And it's becoming one of the relatively unrecognized plagues of the world. Not joking. And because parents use their cell phones all the time, well, what's a perfect way for a parent to justify their own smartphone use? Let their children have them. Well, then it must be okay. See? If everybody's doing it, then it must be okay. And that's what happened, for example, with smoking. There was really relatively very little smoking. And then in World War II, cigarettes were placed in the rations of the soldiers on the field. So every United States soldier got cigarettes at every single meal. So every single person around them was smoking. Well, then how could it be a bad thing? Let me tell you, it was marketing freaking genius. And then we discovered that, there are some problems with smoking. We're going to discover the same thing with marijuana, that it's going to be way worse than we think as we legalize it. And we're already discovering the same thing with electronics. What's the most common reason for children and parents to justify their use? Not that they have a positive effect, but that everybody does it and they need to feel connected. Except that people who use electronics don't feel connected. They feel jealous. They feel smaller than. They feel less than. The people that I know who surf Facebook constantly end any particular session feeling terrible because what they just saw was essentially a personally produced, carefully edited version of a fictitious life. Everybody is lying on Facebook. I mean, everybody is lying on Facebook. And so we go there and go, well, my life's not that great. The everybody's doing it thing doesn't work very well. If everybody were snorting cocaine, would more people do it? Well, yes, we really are that stupid. But would it be good? Well, no. Cocaine is addictive. Electronics are addictive. A lot of the things that we do are addictive. And so to use that as a reason to delay your child getting electronics is pretty smart. But I can tell you the difference between 13 and 15 is pretty small. And if she'd be addicted at 13, if you wait till she's 15, that's not going to make her less likely to get addicted unless you are very careful about how they're used. You can buy entire books now for parents that tell them how to help their children use electronics, like X hours a day. There are timers on their electronic device where they shut off after being used for a certain period of time. After a certain hour a day, all the electronics in the house go into a basket, including the parents. There are lots of ways to make this better. But we really have to be wise about them. If we don't use them, our children will find the negative ways to use electronics. They will. You continue. My husband has an offer from his phone carrier, so he can give her the latest, and the latest, of course, will be out of date in 15 minutes, but at least as of this reading, the latest, brilliant smartphone, iPhone, whatever it is. And because he has a deal through his carrier where it won't cost very much, at least in the beginning, he wants to give it to her. But he said that he would listen to my opinion. So it's your decision, but I would suggest making your decision based on knowing that these devices distract children literally to death. It introduces them to a virtual world. This isn't talked about very much. In fact, very little, but I'm going to emphasize it here. The danger is that they go from being in a real world where they talk to people, where they look at people, where they listen to inflections, where they pay attention to human beings, to a world that is, not real. This danger is shared in gaming, in porn, in gambling. It all affects the way that we feel about ourselves. It all affects the way that we see the world. It all affects all electronics. All virtual devices affect the way that we feel loved, the way we love other people, and they affect our responsibilities. You recognize those three? It affects the way we feel loved, the way we're loving, and the way we're responsible. People who are on electronics all the time, I promise you, aren't doing as many responsible things as everybody else. And so they are less, and here's the point, happy. That's the point. When parents ask me about electronics, I tell them, the point is this: do you have a family motto? Do you have a guiding single family rule? I can tell you what the answer is in every case. Every case. Have I ever had a parent answer this question? I don't think so. What's your overarching rule? Put a roof over it? No. Happiness. So the question becomes now really simple. Is the decision I'm about to make going to contribute to my child's happiness? And then a whole lot of decisions get a whole lot easier, don't they? So what should you do? You do whatever you want to. My grandson, who's 16 years old and doesn't have a smartphone, has an absolutely adorable, beautiful, responsible, loved, loving, and happy life. Life is hard enough without phones. Really. Why confuse a child earlier than necessary? And if you do get one, its use would still be contingent on her behavior. If she's the least bit inattentive, snotty, has a bad attitude, doesn't listen when you speak, trouble with grades, chores, whatever, you just hold your hand out immediately. The child responds snotty, you just hold your hand out. And you train the child right from the beginning when she gets the phone what that means. She just lost her phone. For how long? I don't know. You decide. But if the child loses their phone for 5 minutes, it's not exactly a great lesson. Other things, other conditions, complete transparency with the phone. Children have I'll send you an article if you'd like to that was written by a guy who works with kids who are addicted to electronics. Children have zero right to privacy. None while they live with you. You're there to teach them. You're there to teach them to be happy. How do you do that if they're doing things you don't know about? How? I was a chemistry major for years and years, and I'll never forget this guy, this laboratory research professor, who would go through the lab, and if he came across something that you'd been working on and mixing chemicals carefully and measuring perfectly and creating some new molecule, and he would grab the beaker, it's the name of a little piece of glassware, and he would just pour whatever it was that you'd created for all day long down the sink. And that only happens once before you don't forget that again. But the first time you say, why did you do that? Is it labeled? Is your beaker labeled with exactly what's in it? Well, I was just about to. It's not. So you don't know what's in it. And since you don't know what's in it, the next thing you add could explode the entire lab because you don't know what's in it. Your children are in a position just that dangerous. Not joking. If you don't know what's going on with them, that could be the thing that destroys them. So if they have a smartphone, complete transparency. They can't delete any text. There's nothing on their phone that you can't pull up and see. And you remove the phone from them immediately upon any attitude or lack of responsibility. Couldn't begin to say this too strongly. Smartphones can be brilliant, or they can be the death of your kid. Not joking. New subject. This is from a man mostly unfamiliar with real love, and he's dating a young woman whose name is Jill. He frankly doesn't like it. So remember, he's unfamiliar with real love. Jill is familiar. He doesn't like it that she consults real love wise people about their dating and about her relationship with him. And he writes, I'm reading the Real Love and Dating book with Jill, and she said to email you. Can a married couple have a successful relationship simply by giving unconditional love to each other? Or do they need to get unconditional love from outside sources, other people, when they get empty? He doesn't say this. He hates it presently that she has friends that are not him. He's already jealous. And he's especially jealous that she gets the opinions of people in real love. And if they give her an opinion that leads to unconditional love and his doesn't, she'll take their opinion over his. So with that context, I answer him. I can tell you from vast experience that unconditional love is the only thing that creates a happier relationship. And very, very few couples have the ability to supply sufficient unconditional love to each other. We all come into relationships wounded. We need help. In hospitals, they don't have little therapy. They might have, say in psychiatric institutions, little therapy groups where people get together and share experiences and learn from each other. But there's almost always somebody there more experienced to help them. But in hospitals where they treat physical conditions, the patients don't treat each other. It turns out, shocking, they need help. So in a month or so, they're going to operate on my back and free up a pinched nerve and blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to be asking a patient who's already had that operation to please do mine. Because after all, they know what it's like to have one. No, I'm going to ask a guy who went to school for 200 years and spent $1 million learning how to do this. And I'm only too happy to pay him a great sum of money to do it right. So very few couples come together with the ability to heal old childhood wounds. So for a while, it's usually necessary for them to have a source of love from another place, like Jill does with me, or like Jill does with other wise people. I don't care that it's me at all. That's also what loving parents are for, although they often do that badly. But parents ideally were put there to, teach us to be loving and happy. Regrettably, they usually inflict the childhood wounds that then the kid has to heal from for the rest of their lives. If individuals in a couple find that source and that source of love from somebody who has it and trust and remember it, they really can then succeed by unconditionally loving each other, but they had to get it somewhere else first. And God, in addition, can be a major or even primary source of that love, by definition, outside the partnership. New subject. I know a lady whose mother is controlling, critical, judgmental. It just sort of goes on and on, blah, 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 blah. She didn't realize that this wasn't even healthy until she felt the contrast after being unconditionally loved. So when I first met her and I asked her about her mother, she said, oh, my mother is so loving. This was a great word. She's always been so involved in my life. Turns out later on, involved was a code word for controls every single thing that I think or say or do or eat or anything else. So she had to first feel loved to even know that unconditional love was possible. And then she could contrast that to the way that she had been raised and went, wow, was I raised differently from the way that I thought. So she wrote, my mother sends these critical emails to me all the time. So we're talking about daily. What do I do with them? Every one of them just kills me. They make me feel so small. So this is a question from a lady who, when I first met her, remember, said, oh, my mother, it was just perfectly loving. She was just mother of the year because she was so involved. And now she's learning that involved means controls everything. And now just the emails kill her. Just make her feel like a tiny little worthless rat. Well, you get to do anything you want to. I'm not going to control you any more than your mother. But I would suggest two possible choices that I've seen work. You do whichever you want or create a third choice. Tell her that you need a break, meaning you need a break in your relationship. I've helped a great many people do this. It's an easy thing to say. You send it by email. Do not ever do it in person. You will never get out of that discussion alive. You'll die right there in that conversation. So you send an email that says, I'm learning some things about myself. I'm learning to be happier. I'm learning to feel more loved. I'm learning to be more loving. And as part of this, I'm detaching from old ways of believing and old relationships. So I'll be getting back with you when I'm ready to resume talking to you. That could be several months or more. So this will be my last communication. There, done. I didn't read that. I could do that asleep. It's simple. It's kind. It's not attacking her. You're just saying, I'm taking a break from old things. Not old as in because you're an old person. I'm sure she would take offense at that too. Or, so you could take a break from her. Or you could do this, because I've done this with many people. You could ask a friend you trust, somebody in real love who knows what loving looks like. You didn't before, till you were loved, so you would need somebody who does know what it looks like. Have a loving friend read your mother's emails. So you get an email from your mother and you forward it to your friend and you don't read it. The people who decide, well, I'll just check this one. That's very often the email from hell designed to leave a scorched earth everywhere it goes. Have a loving friend read your mother's emails and tell you whether they're worth responding to. So, for example, your mother might write and say, your father died today. Well, that might be something you'd want to know. Who knows? We had a flood and everybody in our town is dead but me. Okay, then your friend might say to you, read the email. But let your friend decide, because your friend knows what loving and unloving is, and you don't need any more unloving. Everybody pay attention to this. The reason I say take a break or have a friend read the emails is healing from childhood wounds is hard enough. Many people spend their entire lives doing it and fail. They never heal their childhood wounds. And so they're nothing but balls of reaction their entire lives, and they're never happy. It's hard enough under the best circumstances. It becomes pretty much impossible to heal childhood wounds while the person or people who caused them, usually parents, are still communicating the same negative and critical things. So we're just avoiding that. We're making healing possible. I'm not criticizing your mother. I don't know her. Don't care. Not blaming her. This is all for you. So I did that with this. I did the second choice with this particular person. I made the two suggestions, and she asked me to be the friend who read her emails. So I would read her mother's emails and then say, respond with this. Like, for example, her mother had some estate execution that needed to be done for her mother. So do you want the money that you got put in a bank? Do you want it sent to you in a check? Do you want it? Then I would just say to her, tell your mother where you want the money put. Or just ignore. But on the whole, she just ignored her mother's emails, and she began to heal. She began to feel happy. She began to feel like there wasn't a monster sitting on her shoulder, ready to bite her in the neck all day long, which is what it felt like every time she got an email. So then she wrote me, the woman did, and said, my mother is coming to town for business. Should I spend time with her? You're kidding, which is what I said. You can't even read her emails. So how would you be able to spend time with her while she's in town for business? Really? How would you be able to do that? Because you can't edit what she says. And in person, you get the whole deal. In emails, you just get the words. In person, you get the tone of voice, the posture, the scowl, the condescending look, the bobbing head. I happen to be able to do the condescending look and the bobbing head because I know her mother. You can do anything you want to, but I would recommend you don't. She wrote back and said, so what do I say to her when she says she's coming to town for business? The same town I live in. You write back and say, I won't be able to meet with you on this visit. Have a fun trip. Her mother wrote back another attacking email after she'd said, no, I won't have time to visit with you. But she didn't read it. She forwarded it to me, and I said, don't respond. She's much, much more peaceful. Just 2 or 3 days ago, she wrote me, and she said, I just can't begin to tell you how much more peaceful my life is now that I don't feel this constant threat in my life. She used to answer the question that I asked her about what she wanted to do about her mother by asking the question that we ask at the beginning or at the end of every video chat. How do things change? How does a relationship change? How does a circumstance change when I bring real love into it? Or another question you could ask is, do I want to be happy or not? Like with the electronics. If anything interferes with your happiness, you don't want to do it. Makes life pretty simple, and it works. We'll see you in a week.